Hello, good afternoon. Welcome once more. It's been a long day. It's been a long week. It's been a long 2 weeks with COP27, but we're almost there. And I see a lot of tired faces, but hopefully we'll get you excited a little bit with this panel. It's a light and fluffy panel talking only about the global Stocktake due next year. So please bear with us another 45 minutes or so as we go through this panel. So when we organized this panel, we wanted to reflect a little bit more not only about the progress that we're making towards COP28, but also the bigger journey in that sense. And we know that the global stocktake is a key deliverable due for next year at COP28. So perhaps a conversation building on the many conversations that has happened to help us take perspective in that sense and see how the global stocktake can be a lot more than just a scorecard for the implementation of the Paris Agreement. We are joined by a very distinguished panel with us today. On my left, we have Randa Munir, who is the Africa and Middle East Stakeholder Engagement Lead at the High Levels Champions team. Welcome, Randa. Next to her, we have our colleague and neighbor, Amjad Abdullah, who is the Head of Partnerships at the International Renewable Energy Agency. And we're based on the same premises, more or less. And next to him, we're joined by Mr. Nick Bridge, who is the Foreign Secretary's Special Representative for Climate Change of the UK. Welcome, Nick. Thank you. And also we have our distinguished guest, Dr. Farhan Akhtar, who is the Chief Scientist for Climate Change at the US Department of State and also the co-facilitator of the Global Stocktake process. So welcome. And we'll be joined momentarily with our colleague, Ulisi Lucy, who is an artist and a climate change activist coming to us from the Kingdom of Tonga. He'll be joining us shortly. So welcome to the panel. So perhaps we can start with a bit of discussion in terms of what does the global stocktake mean. Article 14 from the Paris Agreement asks that the global stocktake assesses the implementation of the long-term goals of this Paris Agreement, which direction we were going. And we've had the process going on in terms of the taking stock of that and keeping 1.5 alive. So the key question, maybe if I can ask you, Dr. Akhtar, so what would the global stocktake tell us that we don't already know? We have multiple reports coming from the UN system, from different partners, telling us about the gravity of the climate change situation, the speed and the damage that it's inflicting. So what would the global stocktake add to the conversation?
Thank you, Radan, for the introduction and inviting me to be part of this panel to discuss the global stocktake and where we are in the 2-year process of the global stocktake, and to answer your question about what we're expecting to be delivered out of our dialogue. So I first also will send my apologies for my colleague Harold Winkler, who unfortunately had some responsibilities for his delegation and was unable to come today, but he certainly sends his regrets. But Harold and I have been working since really Glasgow, when we met for the first time as co-facilitators, to develop a broad and inclusive process that really brings together people who are working on those reports that you mentioned, the GAP reports and the IPCC reports, with the parties and the non-party stakeholders into an interactive and inclusive discussion. And over the course of 3 sessions, we had our first session last June in Bonn at the subsidiary body meetings. We had our second session, of course, last week here in Sharm el-Sheikh, and we'll have our third one in June next year. We've designed really interactive and spaces to get at some really tough questions that oftentimes are politically sensitive to bring up into the negotiation space, but of course are critical to move forward on in our pursuit of implementing the Paris Agreement. We've had discussions initially last June, which focused largely on the broader questions of what are we actually trying to talk about, what are our priorities for this dialogue. And at this session, we had a number of breakout sessions that really went into details about really the how-tos. How do you actually implement or carry forward activities within the broad mandate of the Paris Agreement framework, but also, where are the opportunities for further actions, and where are the barriers and challenges that people are facing that need to, you need to identify opportunities to address those concerns. And so Harold and I are building from all of that information and exchanges we've had so far, and we'll be issuing a summary report in a few months that will capture both the discussions today and also reflect on where we are so far in the process, to guide our last session of the dialogue next June, where we hope to have a final discussion really to talk through all those inputs that we've received from both parties, non-party stakeholders, from UN organizations, and others to, what are the broad messages that we can really build. And there, Harold and I have been saying it's the global stocktake can, initially when you think about it, it could be very well sort of an exercise of defining those gaps and pulling the information from each of these reports in terms of, how much more do we need to do on various specific aspects, and how do we really agree on what, how far behind we are. And we're really trying to move beyond that in our dialogue to really understand. We understand that we need to do more in all aspects of implementation, from mitigation to response measures to adaptation to loss and damage to means of implementation support. But we need to, really, how can this process bring information, exchange it at the global level, including at the high level consideration of outputs next year in the UAE, to inform countries as they go back home and in the next round of their commitments to the nationally determined NDCs and other aspects of implementation that they're doing. So, I'll leave it there and happy to respond back at the end. I think we're going to have 1 minute to come back with any final reflections. So I'll turn it back over to you with that.
Thank you. Maybe we can take that minute now.
Okay.
And if we can just build a little bit on it, because the
Sure.
global stocktake is, well, global.
Right.
But nationally determined contributions are national.
Yeah.
National adaptation plans are national. And all the work is happening nationally. And climate, again, is global. So it's an issue of reconciling between having a global picture based on jigsaw pieces here of the puzzle, trying to build a comprehensive picture of that. And I'm sure there will be multiple gaps. So what it is, the key messages beyond the specific gaps that will be addressed at the national level, that can the global stocktake tell us for climate action at COP28 and beyond COP28?
Right. I think the key here is that it's a global conversation at the Paris Agreement level globally, and we're very clear in the mandate for the global stocktake to be collective and not singling out any one country. But what we've seen and heard from both the submissions we've received through the information portal, as well as the discussions we've had, is that a number of countries and participants have brought forward a lot of experiences they've had at their national level, even down to the local level. And we were working, Harold and I, very much in synthesizing broad messages that could be taken into discussions, both at the political level, where they may be discussing a declaration at the UAE next year, but also getting some of those details that have come forward in more of a technical form, in a technical annex to our report, and building out a tool that will allow, if someone has a question of implementing a particular solution in a problem that they're facing in their country, they could use this information that we've built over these 2 years as a resource to inform those work. So we are trying to build a process that can actually speak to that, and also, of course, speak to the next global stocktake 5 years from now.
Thank you very much. I know it's not a magic wand, but it's a political tool that we can use to move forward. And I'd like to welcome who joined us on the panel, Mr. Oli Luisi. If I apologize for mispronouncing your name.
Is that working? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. It is Willie Luisi from the Kingdom of Tonga.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
There you go. Sorry, that's it.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Perhaps I can move maybe to Nick with a question on, to succeed for the global stocktake, we must learn on the multilateral processes and all the tools that came forward. And we do have a key outcome coming from COP26 is the ratchet, which is expected to nudge countries forward to have more ambitious and more committed nationally determined contributions every year. Mm-hmm. However, we didn't see a significant number of countries coming forward. Only 29 countries came this year with more ambitious nationally determined contributions, leaving the process wanting. So my question to you, perhaps, what are some of the key lessons we can learn from the ratchet mechanism, from the diplomatic engagement at COP26, and as we move to COP27, that we can take forward during the global stocktake process?
You're quite right that, actually before the NDCs came our COP presidency massive decision to, whatever the limits of net zero, the net and the challenge of having the policies to deliver it, fundamentally setting the world on that trajectory and going up from almost no countries to 90% of the world Net zero had a huge shift in, so having that target changes the way that the world looks at the problem. We know that from having a national law with carbon budgets. That means that every decision has to be compatible with that carbon budget. So of course this is about action and implementation, but if you don't have the target, you don't have the baseline legislation, the ability to enforce it, you don't make progress. So I think it was vital to start with that net zero vision and to send that signal, because the money has to flow not just from countries, but from the entire financial system. And then the NDCs were then the next step. We're up to 33, by the way, NDCs this year, but of course 154 countries did NDCs last year. And the critical point there is that you needed to show that the Paris Agreement was working. There was an irreversible momentum, but when we said we would ratchet, we did, and we got 100 and whatever 154 and 33 is added together. Nearly all the parties ratcheted. Was it enough? No, of course not. But was it significant? To a varying degree. Our experience trying to lead the G7 presidency at the same time was that the G7 committed to 1.5 degree compatible NDCs. Do we have all the policies to sit behind that? Not yet, but again, targets. So I think that the NDC experience was a positive one. I think we did get some significant further ratchets. But remember that we weren't going to have a ratchet this year. This was something that all parties agreed to at Glasgow, that we did the 5-year ratchet, but then we went again because the science tells us that things are moving much faster than we realized. So all of those things, I think, were important. The link across to the global stocktake is obviously another key element of the Paris Agreement, and vital that we assess what's going on, and that informs further ambition. Informs further ambition not just into the long term, but into the near term. We don't have time to not act on the immediate outcome of the global stocktake, and so it's going to be very important as we build up to the global stocktake to make sure that it results in near-term actions and further ratchets, as well as longer term. I think you mentioned the vital importance of the balance across all issues. Just to remind us, the NDCs are about mitigation, but also all the other elements. Adaptation, we put a big effort as presidency to hugely raise and level out the importance of adaptation and resilience alongside mitigation, the financing that needs to flow, and then the fairness and the justness of the whole agenda as well, feeding in much more indigenous, youth, and other elements to the Glasgow Pact. So the global stocktake has to have that same mindset of creating the momentum that we tried to achieve, if you're asking for comparisons, that we tried to achieve with the NDCs. The global stocktake can also help parties in the development and implementation of those long-term strategies. I finished where I started by saying, that net zero gives you the overall framing, and we need to make sure that the global stocktake does lead to those practical policy solutions for the long-term strategy delivery as well. The global stocktake takes place in the middle of this absolutely critical decade in the 2030s. That is where the fight is won or lost, and so it just reinforces how important it is that we make the progress that we need to make in the next few months, technical and political, so that it's a success next year.
Thank you, Nick. I think the key common thread here is instruments for measurement of progress. And our Secretary General opened this COP by saying we are on a highway to hell. But the optimist in me disagrees. Hopefully I'll keep my job. With the goal that you have the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. You have the EU 55 and all the work that's ongoing now to decarbonize and reduce dependency. You have China being the world's biggest investor in solar. You have all these projects, the UAE and other partners coming forward. So there is, I don't know where we stand. Is 8.5 still a possible scenario or not? And what does it mean for us when we accelerate our implementation? And I suppose the global stocktake would give us a picture in terms of where we stand and how can this move forward. But then again, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And here where I can move to you, perhaps, Randa,
right,
and asking you a question about implementation, because His Excellency Sameh Shukri, the COP27 president, keeps reiterating is that we need to stress the centrality of finance, we need to stress the centrality of implementation, and we need to move forward with concrete action, with projects. And every time I listen to Dr. Mahideen, I say, yes, exactly, that's the point in which to move forward.
Yeah.
So maybe I can ask you, from your perspective and your experience working with the high-level champions team, what is the progress on financing that we see, and how can the global Stocktake nudge that?
Great, thank you very much, and I would like to thank you after 2 long weeks, but very successful, to make the time and join us today. An honor to be on this panel with this distinguished speakers. I will start very quickly by explaining what we do as UN climate change high-level champions, and then get to your answer on how to turn this into an implementation and products on the ground that are real life and it would advance the agenda and achieve the goals of Paris Agreement and Marrakesh Partnership. So as the UN climate change high-level champions, we are fully committed to support the work on the global Stocktake, COP presidencies, the chairs of the subsidiary bodies and co-facilitators, Dr. Farhan and Harold. We are focusing mainly on the how to do it, on the implementation, the opportunities that are there that could be provided in supporting the policy makers and the governments. Engaging non-party stakeholders and collaborating to deliver the goals of Paris Agreement and the Marrakesh Partnership specifically. And that will happen only by shifting and encouraging the society towards a decarbonized economy to thrive for a healthy, resilient, and net zero world. With that, that includes governments, voluntary collaborative actions taken at the level of cities when you talk about localization, and very quickly I'll give you some examples of that. On the regional level, on the businesses, investors, and civil societies as well. So I'm pulling some examples here from some achievements that the high-level champions have announced during COP26, and that is a collective effort from our wonderful team throughout the year. I will start with the announcement of the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda that defines 30 adaptation outcomes across the various sectors. And that would increase the amount of 46 billion in public and private provided finance to adaptation resilience to 140 to 300 billion per year to 2030. We have the number 2, the assets to flow report. We also have on the regional level, we had 5 regional roundtables resulting in projects that are bankable and also investable. To complement that, and we had one for the Africa region for the other 5 regions. To complement that, we had the Africa Climate Market Initiative also announced to make it, to reduce the risk and attract the financial institutions to kind of help and support, get these projects on the ground. As you say, it's an implementation cup. We also have the Africa insurance industry to underwrite US dollars 14 billion to cover the climate risks by 2030. And I'll speak at a very kind of unique also initiative we came with a localization of a smart and green projects. And we have reached out to all communities all over Egypt. That could be replicated in other places of the world. And as you say, that kind of reaching the communities to kind of encourage regional business, but also take these projects to a higher level with a bigger scale to address smart and green projects. Getting the elements of digitalization as well and having it sustainable, have a longevity in its process. And the last one I will mention here, and the last is the Innovation for Climate, and that was announced during Science Day as a program and a platform to bring in the scientists, researchers, and innovation for applied science to help support the private sector in implementing these projects on the ground. Some examples would be the smart grids, solar panels, the water security, and the water meterings to take this to a second level of an implementation. I remember 1 year ago when it was the Glasgow Climate Pact outcome, and we had the collaboration as one of the 4 outcomes of Glasgow Climate Pact to say collaboration between governments, private sector, scientists, researchers, and non-state actors, as well as the NGOs. So that would bring that to a form of a bankable, investable, and also we talked about innovation in financial instruments to kind of make this, to reduce the risk for attracting the case for money to flow in and implement these projects. I will list 2 more very quickly before we move to the second point, is the Africa Cities Water Adaptation Fund, and thanks for the COP27 to bringing this topic of water, and the next is of water, energy, and food. There are three that are complementing each other between adaptation and mitigation, but bringing water to the attention of the COP27. So the Africa Cities Water Adaptation Fund was one of the initiatives from the Global Stocktake as well. And then in the biodiversity, yesterday the COP presidency launched the Enhancing Nature-Based Solutions for Climate Transformation, and that's in collaboration with the International Union. So that shows another example from how the collaboration between the presidency, the private sector, and the other institutions are coming together. So I will stop there, and I hope that kind of showed some examples, but if more examples have been, it's like a big puzzle. With these 2 fruitful weeks, we had so much energy on the ground. I've been told we have 45,000 delegates on the ground here in what they turned into a sustainable city of Sharm el-Sheikh with the solar panels, the electric buses. So this is the success of the ambition, the raising ambition, engaging everyone. We also have for the first time, the Youth and Children Pavilion that is bringing all the voices together and reflecting how the future will be designed in a way that is sustainable for our economies. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Randa. I did see many of those initiatives, announcements, and I look forward for a lot of implementation and a lot of action on the ground, which perhaps leads me to Amjad. Irina has submitted inputs to the first round of the technical dialogue on the global stocktake, and you did highlight a lot of the efforts that you have on renewable energy. So my question to you is in terms of who gets the renewable energy? We know there is an imbalance in investments into renewable energy between the global north and the global south. And in terms of countries which can actually have the regulatory framework and the mechanisms to accept that kind of foreign direct investments and other related initiatives. How can the global stocktake perhaps shed some light on these inequalities in terms of where those investments are directed toward?
Thank you very much, Raidan. Thank you. Apologies, my voice is a bit low. Been here 2 weeks, I think I'm losing the voice. I still can manage one day. So yes, we have provided our input to the global stocktake. We recognize that this is one of the fundamental elements of the Paris Agreement, and that's why Irina, with our analytical work, we provided our inputs where we are and where we wanted to go, and of course how we can achieve this. According to Irina's World Energy Transition Outlook of 2022, over 90% of the solutions to keep the global temperature rise 1.5 degrees Celsius by mid-century involves renewable energy through direct supply, electrification, energy efficiency, green hydrogen and bioenergy combined with carbon capture and storage. The report, of course, further highlights the energy transition investments will have to increase at least by 30% over planned investments to a total of 131 trillion between now and 2015. A transformed energy transition or energy sector will have to have 122 million jobs by 2050. Renewable energy jobs, of course, alone will not account for more than a third. I take your point. Yes, there is a huge imbalance. Why there is a huge imbalance? I think it is the enabling frameworks is not across the globe. And that's why we are putting a lot of effort to kind of levelizing that kind of enabling framework, the much needed regulatory frameworks and infrastructure to put in place where there is a direct investment to scale up the renewable in the global south. And it is the true fact that, we are not, global south and global north are not equal. So that's why we have the global north and south. And that is one of the fundamental factors that IRENA, as an intergovernmental agency to enhance the deployment of all forms of renewable energy, is making a huge effort to provide the necessary support in putting up the right enabling frameworks for right investments in scaling up of renewable energy. We are helping countries across Africa, the small islands, the LDCs, and other countries in the developing world to put the right enabling frameworks, the much needed the regulatory framework. Because if you don't have the kind of enabling framework for investments to attract on renewables, obviously the financial institutions will not come and invest on renewables because they don't have a guarantee that what's going to happen on their investment. You need to ensure that there is a security on their investments. That is one of the fundamental efforts that we as IRENA is, quite frankly, putting a lot of effort on that. Excuse me. So we are working across a number of African countries, and as I said, we have been helping a number of countries to provide the renewable readiness assessments so that you know where are the gaps. So you need to know how to fill those gaps. That is what we're doing, the analytical work, and of course the kind of assurance for investments, for investor guarantee. We just recently launched the Energy Transition Accelerator platform, where we are trying to help the countries to tap, and we as IRENA in the Energy Transition Accelerator platform, we would provide the needed assurance and guarantees for countries to access easy in the financial market. So that's what we currently doing it. So happy to contribute. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you for that detailed response. I think one key issue that the global stocktake will help nudge forward is in relation to just energy transition and providing energy access to where it's needed the most. And IRENA has been a leader in technical cooperation and supporting those initiatives in order to make sure that those investments can flow and the enablers required to make this energy transition and deliver energy where it's needed is made available. Perhaps I can move to Mr. Oli Lucy with a question trying to link both elements. We know, for instance, that the global stocktake has included an innovation where it accepts creative inputs into the process, which I thought that was fascinating as an entry point. And so my question to you, perhaps as an artist and as a citizen of a small island developing state, what does a global stocktake mean to you in that sense?
Your moderator, thank you, and I'm apologizing for being late. I was with the ministerial with the Egypt, so it was an honor to be speaking on that. May I give this opportunity to our ambassador of Tonga? He will speak briefly about our position as well before I deliver my own as an artist and international artist. Mr. Vaingatone, our ambassador for United Nations.
Yes. Well, welcome, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator and fellow panelists. Thank you for this late intrusion, and I thank Willie for inviting me to be part of his little segment of his remarks. I believe the question is with respect to the global stocktake, but if I may maybe just concentrate on the scenario of Tonga and maybe allow I think my panelists have already covered quite a lot in terms of the global stocktake. But by referencing Tonga, it does contribute to the global scenario. In the case of Tonga, it's a very small country in the South Pacific. It's got 700 square kilometers of land and 700,000 square kilometers of sea. So it's very typical of all small island states in the South Pacific to have, we refer to ourselves as large ocean states. And this is where we see the nexus between oceans and climate change. And of course, we start off by our global north being the high emitters of carbon dioxide. And looking into the future beyond COP28, we continue to call on all big emitters to reduce their carbon emissions by committing and raising their ambition to implementing their NDCs. And that's not there is a big contrast. In the case of Tonga, not just Tonga, but Tonga combined with all the Pacific Island countries, our emission is about 0.02 to 0.03 of the global emission. It's very negligible. So our cry is real. Our cry is sad, and we need the global north to reduce their emissions. There is a stark, a great danger for Tonga and many of the Pacific Island countries in terms of sea level rise. If the global north and the big emitters continue in their behavior of high carbon emissions, there is a great risk in terms of sea level rise encroaching into our coastal lands. And so we have submitted two targets for our second NDC. So we've already submitted our first one, and we're submitting our second one. So that is great testament to our commitment to the implementation of the NDCs under the Paris Agreement. So in that second submission of our NDC, we have increased our marine protected areas as a way of mitigating sea level rise in terms of losing permanently land to sea level rise, and also protecting our fish stock. So in terms of sea level rise, there is a rise of 6 millimeters per year. In the case of Tonga, that's 3 times the global average. So in terms of the little statistics, it means a lot for Tonga. So we continue to try, so much so that the Pacific leaders in their decision, they have their annual meetings every year. In their decision last year, they made a declaration to maintain the maritime boundaries of the Pacific Island states and not to subject it to change in the face of sea level rise caused by climate change. So we've submitted that declaration to the 6th Committee at the United Nations General Assembly and also to the International Law Commission. Again, we are calling on nations to pay their dues in terms of reducing their carbon emission and implementing their NDCs. Lastly, Mr. Moderator, I call on the UAE and our partners. This is the essence of partnerships, as has been stated by our SDG 17 in the 2030 agenda, and also the South Pathway. We count on partnerships. This is where the gap is, finance. We know we want to implement our NDCs in Tonga, despite the fact that we are small emitters of carbon dioxide. Nevertheless, we need finance to implement our NDCs. And we do this in addition to marine protected areas. We also engage in renewable energy. We have a target of reducing our emission by promoting our renewable energy targets, and we're aiming to achieve 100% by 2045. So again, we are really making our effort, and we call on developed countries to assist in terms of contributing in terms of finance to help bridge this gap that we are facing. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Your Excellency, for your intervention. This is why 1.5 is the limit. It's not the goal. It's not the aspiration. And we want to make sure that we keep 1.5 alive. It's a question of survival. And we stand in solidarity with the people of Tonga.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you for that intervention, and unexpected as well. And thank you. As you know, your global Stocktake for next year it's your main, and I know that every voices count, and that's our voices count. My message as an artist and also as a climate activist, as I was in Glasgow last year together with our ambassador, I was the only one who was able to get out of Tonga last year. It took me 3.5 days to get to Glasgow. This time it took me 3.5 days to get here, out of Tonga. But, it's worthwhile. What is important is the voices of the ocean, as our ambassador expressed in the highest level in partnership. Our oceans does not divided us, it's united us all. And that's the word of our Professor Peli Hawafa. Our diversity is our highest for unifying us all. My message is very simple. Everyone has their own culture and heritage, and that's your fabric That's your colors. But those colors, when we bring them all together, will become colorful. Imagine the future of our children and our youth of tomorrow. And that tomorrow is today. Without our implementation of this COP here today, our history will go underwater. And that's a truth. This year, January the 15th, you, the Tonga people, experience the most intensive volcanic eruption, equally equated to 500 of the Hiroshima bomb. And that's only the beginning. And that's for sure. All of us here, we have something to work in partnership together. And that's my message as an artist and also as a climate activist. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, UAE. And we are looking forward for the COP28. Sioto tua fatu, malo apito.
Thank you very much. You are standing at the front lines of climate change. We talk about it here, but it's a reality, and it's a grave reality.
Yeah.
It's a question of survival and a lot more beyond that, and I would like to make sure that in the negotiations, in this process, through the global stocktake, through the ratchet, through anything that is everything that we do here, that voice is clear, is loud, and it also makes it. And I will assure you that we will continue this for COP28 and beyond. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this was a discussion on the global stocktake, on the aspirations that we'd like to have in mind. And perhaps we can welcome a question or two from the audiences. What comes to mind on the global stocktake, on what you'd like to see coming forward, if you have any pressing questions. And I know we're holding back the team for a while. This is the last event at the UAE Pavilion. But please bear with us. This is worthwhile. Yes?
Yeah.
I think I'll stand up so that everyone can see me. Thank you so much for the incredible interventions that Your Excellencies gave. My only question is that, there is a systematic approach, and there is, in the international level, and there's also a national approach. I myself have worked with an organization called Care About Climate, who are official observers to the UNFCCC. And what we did is that we created something called the NDC Equity Tracker, which tracked the nationally determined contributions and other national policies of each country from an intergenerational lens and a gender equality lens. And some of the results that we found was quite unfortunate. And there is a big gap that needs to be closed. Especially in my country, I'm proud to say that there is great, implementation, and there is integration on language around young people's involvement as well as young women and girls' involvement, but that is not the true for many national policies. And I think that the global stocktake should be taking into consideration intergenerational justice and rights. So my question is, how are you going to ensure that young people in all their diversity are involved in each step of the global stocktake process, in the enhancement, in the development, as well as the implementation? And one message that I want to give after listening to all of your interventions that I feel that we are really lacking is that, especially world leaders, I think they need to learn to comfortably sit with the discomfort. I don't think if you are unable to sit with the discomfort, the 1.5 that we keep talking about, we're never going to be able to achieve that, because the current policies are in track for like 3 degrees Celsius. And as Sualu was mentioning, many other island nations, they're going to cease to exist. And it's not only the land that is going to be wiped away, but it's the lives and the cultures that's going to be wiped away. And it is the youth-led solutions, it's the youth-led innovations, the youth-led stories that's going to go underwater as well. So, yeah, that's my question.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I'm sure intergenerational justice is a key element of all the work that we do, because this is a long-term engagement. Perhaps we can open the floor again to our panelists for your intervention, maybe starting with Dr. Akhtar, since that was a question for you.
Sure, yeah. Well, I could speak to the question of the technical dialogue that we've been organizing. And Certainly, this is a unique process within the negotiation space, in that we do actually have direct dialogue between parties and non-party stakeholders. We've certainly, Harold and I, as we design the dialogue so far, have tried to bring in diverse views, including youth views, into to the discussions. And as we put together the messages that come out of this, I think certainly there'll be lots of aspects that I think will be important to reflect. And I think one of the other sort of processes that we didn't envision even in Katowice when the parties agreed on the process for the global stocktake was the holding of broader events within the global stocktake period. And so, the conclusions last June, parties invited intersessional activities to be held and for those to generate inputs into the global stocktake process. And I think there's certainly, we've seen regional climate weeks being organized and other events that's been organized. And of course, we'd also welcome other inputs into the process from events that are occurring around the world. And then, the outcomes that come out of this process is not just what gets, negotiated by the high-level ministers at COP28, but it's also the dialogue that's been driven by having this time of reflection as a part of our ratchet mechanism of the Paris Agreement, where the global community does look at how much progress we made, where are the further opportunities, and how do we move forward on the gaps that we've recognized. So we hope that could be a structure, and as we learned it by doing, as we say in the global stocktake world, we can hopefully build going into the second one as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr.
Let me.
maybe
Yeah, we've also invited 7 children from around the world to join us here at the COP27. So there was one effort done to include, and I totally agree with you. And I look at the room here; it's already filled with 16 ladies, beautiful ladies. But we put this at the forefront of our agenda to kind of make sure that is reflected in the work we are doing with the communities and have the future generations, the children and the youth, at our top priority. So just to ensure you with that, and then gender as well is one of included. Thank you.
Thank you, Randa.
Let me also, as you said, we have provided our inputs on the global stocktake, and Akhtar, I mean, as you may know that the subsidiary bodies also have invited IRENA to undertake technical dialogues. So in that respect, the next General Assembly of IRENA, we are going to have a high-level event on global stocktake that would perhaps help your work as the co-facilitator in the process. And we obviously welcome all to attend and obviously provide your thinking. Of course, we will invite high-level panelists across the globe in order to provide their perspectives. Of course, we would use our analytical power within IRENA to kind of provide the kind of insights where we are, where we wanted to go, and how we can unlock the most needed, the path towards a 1.5 degree. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me try and reflect on the question and also the last speaker and the subject, the global stocktake, in a final comment. I'll directly take away the request and the recommendation to the UK government, the UK negotiators. I think what we heard about the real world impacts and what I was saying about the frameworks that we tried to implement and which are driving forward now, COP27, COP28, there was a very specific change in the Glasgow Climate Pact as to the integration of non-state actors, young people, indigenous people, and justice and rights more generally. So we did our best to genuinely enhance that. And I'm struck, I was just, as you asked the question, I was just going back through my program in the last 2 days. More than half of my engagements have been directly youth engagements, and I'm not trying to show off, I'm just trying to say it just reflects that those are the conversations that we're now having, and I think that's different and hopefully a tiny signal of how it's changing. But on the global stocktake itself, let's just remember that this always was intended to be a real watershed moment. That was how it was written into the Paris Agreement. We have to get world leaders there next year to make sure that the outcomes of the global stocktake are implementable. I know that it's such an overused word in this COP. They've got to be implementable. They've got to be achievable through concrete actions. And it's got to be about momentum and ambition now and every minute of every day going forward, and not some abstract concept. So let's try and bring together, I think, sort of the technical and the real world impacts, and make sure that the global stocktake really delivers what it was intended to deliver. My final comment, I think, is just the urgency. You know, the understanding. I mean, many people in this room knew that things would accelerate and things would be worse than perhaps we knew from looking backwards. But we've got the evidence to prove it to the rest of the world now. So we have no excuses not to ramp this up and succeed this year and next. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Perhaps, Ulsi, we can hear from you also some reflections.
I think my reflective on this, it's a historical moment for the Kingdom of Tonga and also for the South Pacific. And I speak generally on behalf of the Pacific Ocean's small island states. It's important that our hope lies on our youth. And I think it's important that as an artist, as a climate activist, I stand in front and I say that loudly, how important for the policymakers to become inclusive about our culture, our heritage, and also the livelihood of who we are. It's important. As you are aware, we are on the front line of your interact action. And that's not your fault. But I can say this, that's somehow along the way, what we needed is finance to be able to secure ourselves as our ambassador. So please, give us what we needed, what you can share with us. It's important for our renewable energies. It's important for our youth. It's important for everyone. So my personal wishes for COP28, for the Kingdom of Tonga, and also for the South Pacific, to be able to have a big representation. And I believe our voices will bring the energy that the world needs. What we need, we can live in harmony with one another. And that's my last voice, and that's my last pitch. And I say that humbly in our culture and our heritage. Sia to tuafatu, malo for this amazing opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's profound how there are 55 small island developing states with 68 million or so. And we in the world population around the world, we can scramble together to put whatever is needed in order to make sure that we prevent the worst and we put you on a pathway for continuing prosperity and survival in that direction. And that's a message that would resonates a lot with us, and I think we can take it forward for COP28 and beyond.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, I'd like to thank my distinguished panel and His Excellency, the Ambassador of Tonga to the UN.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for bearing with us late afternoon audiences.
Thank you.
And we'll take it here from here, and looking forward to seeing you in the next COP, if not sooner.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.